Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 24th of May 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. We're going to go to look at the northern area first, of course, where the Russians are attacking into Kharkiv, or at least they were. They seem to have ground somewhat to a halt. And indeed, no changes again to the westernmost salient here, the Lyobek one, where they were looking at getting into Litsy and coming down to attack Kharkiv, not so much in terms of ground attack, but artillery firing into Kharkiv. Well, that seems to have ground to a little bit of a halt. The Institute for the Study of War says geolocated footage published on May the 22nd shows that Ukrainian forces recently marginally advanced southeast of Lukyantsy, northeast of Lipsy. And this is here from GIK, actually, the ISW citing him, he's part of Andrew Perpetua's team. Russian artillery using Krasnopol, that's a laser-guided artillery, munitions to fire Ukrainian infantry in tree lines at these positions. We'll just look at a couple of these to see where the Ukrainians are and see if that does indicate some kind of advance. And yeah, that's so. Just to let you know where that is, that's within the Russian-controlled area, if you believe Surayat maps. But of course, there's a big difference between Surayat maps and what the other mapper says. Say this lower blue line here is the Ukrainian defensive line, as according to Andrew Perpetua. And so if the Ukrainians are here, then that's in the grey zone, and that's them sort of pushing back. Possibly they either robustly control that, so you might have the blue control line here for Andrew Perpetua, and the Russian control line still back there, and a smaller grey zone, or that's just activity within the grey zone. So it's hard to know, but the Russians are obviously attacking the Ukrainians with their artillery, laser-guided artillery there. Let's just have a look to see if there's anything different in maybe another one of these geolocations, and we'll whack that in. And yep, slightly further to the south. So just in those tree lines in that grey zone, the Ukrainians are attacking. It appears moving forward. So that is a change from what it was previously, where the Russians were just marching through here. That seems to have stalled, and the Ukrainians might well be pushing back at the moment as they are receiving more reinforcements and equipment. It's also appears to be similar in the eastern salient here, especially around Vovchansk. So Surat Maps here says situation on the northeastern front. Over the last 4 days, the Ukrainian army was able to regroup and re-enter the Vovchansk area north of Vovcha River. The area was not actually secured by the Russian army, although it was declared under their control after Ukrainian withdrawal. Interesting. So that gives you a bit of an insight into Surat Maps' head here. So he put it under control and then says the area wasn't actually secured by the Russian army, even though they declared it. In other words, he moved his map because the Russian army declared it, and now he's saying, but that wasn't actually the case. Well, okay, well then don't move the lines. So yeah, that statement to me tells you quite a lot about Surat Maps and the way that they move forward whenever the Russians sort of either claim it themselves, the Russian MD, or there's any evidence that there's a human being or a vehicle in that vicinity, whether they control it or not. So, for example, what we've just been seeing, Ukrainians over in this tree line, right? So we have visual evidence that Ukrainians are here. So the first thing is Surat Maps hasn't changed. So maybe they don't know about that, but they're not very good at taking Russian or claimed Russian advances back. And second of all, there's no need for Andrew Perpetua, for example, to move his line forward for the Ukrainians here, because this is just human beings in a trench line, in a tree line. Doesn't mean that they control that area. They are being hit by artillery. It doesn't look like it's robust control, and so you don't move the lines. It's grey zone, and that's what you'd expect, but that's not what's happened here by his own admission. Anyway, whinge over. Front lines between Horkoho, Hoholia and Olesia Dovsitnoho streets. The front lies between those. So yeah, the Ukrainians appear to be pushing back there as well. That's good news for them. In Vovchansk, the ISW says another prominent Russian mobile blogger claimed that fighting there is becoming positional. Syrsky, so the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainians, stated that Russian forces are now bogged down in street fighting in Vovchansk despite initial tactical successes, and are now transferring reserves to the area from other operational directions. So the Russians are transferring troops, and we heard the other day that they might be transferring troops from that northeastern axis. Well, that renders the whole point of this being diversionary. If that really is one of the rationale, one of the reasons for the Russian attack there, then, you know, moving troops away from the place where you are hoping to attack by gaining a ratio advantage because the Ukrainians have drawn troops away from there because of your diversion. Well, if you're having to draw troops away from there for your own diversion, then things aren't going well. And we have some pictures here from the fighting, thanks to JR, who's done the mapping today. We can get a sense of what's going on in Vovchansk here. Hopefully, if the picture renders. No, that didn't render. We have another one here, though. So you can see it's pretty hellish there. There's been a lot of bombardment from both sides, actually. So both the Russians and the Ukrainians are hammering it with all sorts of munitions. Let's see if there's another picture. Yep. So here's another picture. Make that a little bit bigger for you. You can get the idea. Look, these scarred, blackened buildings being, fire raging through them. We'll look at this video of what's going on in Vovchansk, and yeah, you get a sense of place here. So it is getting absolutely hammered. There's a lot of destroyed buildings, as you can see. Just, my goodness, either rubbleized already or severely damaged, fire, burnt by fire, so on and so forth. There are some pretty horrific scenes coming out of Vovchansk. You can see the smoke that's rising and lying over the whole place. It is a tough view for anyone who knows it and lives there. The Russians are liberating it, and as we know from what their definition of liberation is, it's not going to end well for Vovchansk. So thanks for that added sense of place from JR there. Appreciate that, mate. Right, we come on down to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svat over to Crimea. And as you can see today, like if you look at the map, we've got blue, 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 and blue, all from Syriac maps. There won't be tweets to match all of these, mind, as is often the case, where it's probably going to be some degree of rejigging the map because the Russians haven't quite made the advances that were claimed. Anyway, some gains, as according to both Andrew Perpetua and Syriac maps, in the Krokmalna area just south of Tabaivka. Just going to see if Bilorivka is the next place there. There is talk about this in. So there is a bit of a mix in what the ISW says about this area. Let's look for the Kupiansk stuff, which is here. Syrsky again reported on May the 23rd, so yesterday, that Russian forces continued assaults in the forest areas north of Kupiansk, so that's in the Sinkivka area, and are trying to break through Ukrainian defenses near Kislivka in order to reach the Oskil River. And a Russian mobile blogger claimed that Russian forces are advancing along a railway line north of Kislivka in a direction at Ivanivka and are conducting reconnaissance in force operations near Ivanivka's southern outskirts. Okay, let's put that all on the map. So we're going to go a little bit north from Tabaivka, where we were. Sinkivka, the forest area there that the Russians are trying to still push there. That's that whole Kupiansk area where the Ukrainians have done an absolutely stellar job of keeping the Russians in check there. They've had some fairly good success in the Sinkivka area. It's been hard for them. It's hard fighting up there, as the BBC documentary that recently came out showed. And then Kislivka here claims that the Russians are fighting along the railway line as it comes to the north of Kislivka. So in that direction, it appears that the Russians are trying to move. And then further down past Tabaivka to the south of Krokmalna, the Russians are having a little bit of success there. But that's not mentioned in the ISW explicitly. And then we come down to some gains here for the Ukrainians just to the east of Makivka there, between Ploshchanka. Goodness, that's a place that we mentioned all the time when the Ukrainians were pressuring after their lightning counteroffensive in this area. But yeah, don't hear much about it these days. Ukraine is pushing the Russians back in that area. So that's good news there. And here as well. Again, I don't appear to have the tweets that go along with this from Surrey Maps. Sometimes they make a map change and the tweets can come out sort of 10 hours later, just the way it goes. So it could be that something might be forthcoming later. But yeah, Ukrainians really pushing the Russians back there, and further back than Andrew Perpetua and Deep State Maps have at the moment. And that's around the Yampolivka Turney area. So there had been some reports that the Russians are under the cosh a little bit here. The Ukrainians, this is one of the areas where the Ukrainians are concentrating on counter-attacking. And that's really good news, obviously, for the Ukrainians there. Then we're going to come down to, we'll just look at a picture of the Serebyansky forest. This is one of the heartbreaking areas of the front line, which, this was forest, beautiful forest, up until relatively recently. And now it is nothing but this. That is what that forest now looks like in so many areas. It's absolutely heartbreaking, just the amount of ecological destruction caused by war. Right, Bilahorivka here, the Ukrainians fighting back in this area too. So Surrey Maps does have this one situation on the northeastern front during the last 4 days. Ukrainian army was able to regroup and re-enter the Vovchansk area north of the Vovcha. Oh, what am I talking about? It's the other one. Situation Seversk front. During the last 6 days, the Ukrainian army managed to recapture some positions north of Bilahorivka. This is one of the areas that Surrey Map said the Russians had attacked in and gained all this area up to the line that you can see there, but also in this area. And then further down here, they still haven't rejigged there. And Andrew Perpetua previously said, well, there's evidence that Ukrainians are here, so this is just simply not true. They were repelled. They did try to attack there. Reporting from Ukraine did videos on this, talking about how they were repelled and then had to retreat. Yet Surrey Maps has still got the red line all the way up there. So it might be that the Ukrainians have counterattacked in this area, but it could also be that Surrey Maps got it wrong, and there's evidence that maybe the Ukrainians never were pushed out of there, and now there's evidence of Russians, I don't know, shelling that area. And if the Russians are shelling it, it means the Ukrainians are there, and he can't deny that. So it could be a rejig for that purpose. We have the ISW talking about this, Institute for the Study of War, saying geolocated footage published on May the 23rd, so yesterday, indicates that Ukrainian forces recently marginally advanced north of Bilahorivka. So that is the claim that they have actually done a counterattack there. On the May the 20th, there was a claim that Russian forces seized Bilahorivka, which is what Surrey Maps was going along with, and claimed that Russian forces have only made limited advances in the area at the cost of significant manpower losses. So this is some geolocation from that area, positional combat operations in the Bilahorivka area, where the Russian forces are, according to this video, shelling the Ukrainians, a Ukrainian stronghold. So this is a position of a Ukrainian stronghold. If you remember this morning, I referenced a video. So yeah, right in that area, and that'll be why Surrey Maps has changed the mapping accordingly. Now, there was a video that I think it might have been another GIC video this morning that I was referencing in the hits and losses that showed about 20 lost mainly Russian vehicles in this area. I don't know exactly where it was, but it's a Bilahorivka area, and it has been a very expensive area for the Russians, and that goes towards this idea here that the Mill blogger claimed Russian forces have lost several hundred troops per day during infantry-led frontal assaults on Bilahorivka in February of this year, and that Russian forces temporarily suspended assaults on Bilahorivka in late April, but resumed them early May after reinforcements arrived in the area. But there are, as it says here, made limited advances in the area at the cost of significant manpower losses. And I would add not just manpower, but also equipment losses, as that is abundantly evidence with footage, geolocated footage in that area. So, that's Bilahorivka. Good news for the Ukrainians there. And then when you look at this and you think maybe some slight gains in Chasiv as well, we are. This is a period where the Russians are supposed to be doing really well in terms of this is their offensive period. They're pushing to the north of Kharkiv. And it goes back to my geopolitical video, which is I started off talking about how Putin has announced, or he hasn't announced, it is leaked out that he is up for a ceasefire agreement. And of course, if he's up for those kind of negotiations, it will only be to his benefit, which means I think things are not looking as rosy for the Russians going forward as they would like you to believe. And I keep saying, short of a national mobilization, the Russians could well be in a little bit of trouble. And I think there's elements of culmination, although the Ukrainians are themselves on a precipice in a number of places and they have mobilization issues and they're desperate to get troops to the front line, but they obviously need to train them first. They are starting to mobilize, but I think this may be a bit of a slow turning point where, the Russians have definitely made gains in the Avdiivka area. They are still having success around Krasnohorivka, Novomykhailivka, and Avdiivka, but even there it seems to have somewhat slowed down. And I think if the Ukrainians can get a handle on, and there have been supposedly 6 Russian aircraft shot down in the month of May, if they can get a handle on the glide bombs being used on the Eastern Front, which they aren't in the north because they're not allowed to shoot into Russia, if they can get that sorted here, then that's one of the main components of the Russian advances. When they do make advances, it's on the back of those significant bombardments. And if the Russians are having to change their behavior in the air due to significant VKS losses, Russian Air Force losses, then you could see a bit of a turning point. And then the Ukrainians start hammering with HIMARS and Storm Shadows and attack drones. Could be a bit of a change, a bit of a swing. But I could be being overly optimistic there. Right, we're going to come down to Chasiv Yar, and we can see that there is... Chasiv Yar itself, if you want to get an idea of that. Oh no, we've not got, there's not actually, oh yeah, here it comes. So that's a picture I showed you yesterday. Remember I showed you some pictures around here, and we had Andriivka and Klishchivka here, rubberized both of these settlements. Well, the Russians apparently have made some gains. I don't have the tweet to go along with that, but Suriyat Map says Russians have made gains between Ivanivska and Klishchivka, and that'll be north of the gains that they had supposedly subsequently made in the trench lines here. Now, Suriyat Maps has walked back some of those claims here, and I don't know if they walked them back far enough, because I just see it as highly unrealistic that in one fell swoop the Russians took this entire trench system that they'd been struggling to take for so long, and then in one day it wasn't just that, it was this whole area and Klishchivka. Literally, it was like that whole area was one day's worth of map changing, and I'm like, no. And then that's been now walked back a little bit here, and I wonder whether that'll eventually be walked back to here again. It was the Russian MOD mainly, as far as I remember, claiming about Klishchivka, and just don't believe them prima facie. They are not the most reliable of sources. Okay, but that is the Chasiv Yar area. You can see no changes to the actual Chasiv Yar area, the Canal micro-district, the Bodanivka, or below in Ivanivska. So it's really good news to the Ukrainians. Some stability in that very fraught area where I think the Ukrainians have done a really good job to keep the Russians at bay there, because that was your main one. This was like, yep, Chasiv Yar's going to fall. Even the battalion commander there is like, Chasiv Yar's going to fall by the end of summer. It'll be gone. And there's still a long time to go, and it could still well fall. But you're just thinking, are the Russians overcommitting? Like I said, 50,000 people in Kharkiv, and they seem to have come ground to a halt. Those 50,000 people would have been pretty useful in Chasiv Yar. I don't think Chasiv Yar would have held out to those 50,000. So my opinion is that was a bad strategic or operational decision by the Russians. Anyway, Deep State Map showing a couple of minor gains for the Russians, but in line with what Surek Maps has already said, in the northern Avdiivka area between Arkhangelska and Novoalexandriivka there. Nothing too significant. And then some small gains, as according to Surek Maps, in the Umanska area, which I think we do have. Oh no, it's Novomykolivka. There's mention of that, I think, in the ISW. This is an interesting observation in the ISW. So going back to Chasiv Yar, sorry to flip backwards and forwards. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Syrsky has stated that Russian forces are attempting to siege Chasiv Yar, quote, at any cost, and are using T-90 tanks and infantry fighting vehicles in the area, which Ukrainian forces destroy with anti-tank systems and first-person view drones. Now, we have seen T-90. I've seen a couple of videos today of T-90s. I wonder if they'll be. I wonder if I'll be showing them to you tomorrow or referencing them. And I wonder if they are from Chasiv Yar. So there are T-90s being lost. That's for sure at the moment. But interesting that they are throwing some mechanized equipment there. It's not been a place they've used an awful lot of mechanized equipment historically. During the attack, the Wagner attack, so Wagner was entirely infantry led. They used very little mechanized equipment. We've seen subsequently the Russians use quite a few to attack in the Klishivka area along the high ground here. They did some attacks. They lost quite a lot of equipment along this tree line over an attack that really didn't go very well at all, and they have used quite a bit of equipment attacking through Ivanivska and in the Canal micro district area, attacking along this road and along these tree lines and up here. So they are using mechanized equipment there a lot more than they were previously. Anyway, sorry to flip backwards and forwards. So we are going to come down. I don't think. Oh, do we have something? I did say we had something about Umanska. No, this goes on to Krasnohorivka. Here. Geolocated footage published on May the 22nd showed that Ukrainian forces striking a Russian ammunition supply point at northwestern Umanska, likely indicating that Russian forces recently seized that place. So obviously, if they have a supply depot that's being hit somewhere in the northwest here, then yeah, they're going to have control of that. I think that's a sound conclusion. Mind you, the other mappers still don't have Umansky under Russian control, but Surek Maps does, and increasing their control there. Then when we come further to the south, no changes at Krasnohorivka, although the ISW does mention Krasnohorivka, says geolocated footage on the 22nd and 3rd indicates that the Russian forces recently advanced in southwestern and eastern Krasnohorivka. So that is around there and over here. That's probably referring to the changes that were made over the last couple of days. Obviously, ISW, as I've said before, it updates does their report in my nighttime, so evening, so that this report is already sort of 24 hours old and it will refer to previous days. Then we are coming down to Novomykolivka. ISW here says, and that's where they're showing some change, but also a little bit in Paraskevivka. The Russian army made small advances southwest of Novomykolivka, so around here, and we'd already seen the changes previously up there. It was on yesterday's mapping. So maybe a little bit of advance in that area, but nothing really to worry about. These are very small advances that are insignificant in the whole. Really, in this whole story, it's about the general trends, and I just think that everything is grinding for the Russians. But the worrying time was that Avdiivka attack where they were taking lots of ground, and then when the was it the 115th was it that suddenly went AWOL around Ocheritina, and the Russians really took quite a bit of area quite quickly there. But other than that, and these areas in Krasnohorivka and Novomykolivka, they have come at huge expense, particularly Novomykolivka, where something like 320 plus vehicles have been lost around there now. I think we are starting to see a bit of a grinding down, and we may be moving not towards Ukrainians particularly attacking. I don't think they have the ability to do that. They don't have the boots on the ground, but you might see the odd localized counterattack for very sort of tactical reasons here and there. I'm just not sure the Russians have got the depth of reserves to commit to huge attacks at the moment. Having failed to capture Robotyne head-on, Russian forces are currently attempting to bypass the settlement from the east. Clashes are currently underway, says Astraea Intel, with enemy forces being reportedly supported by smoke screens as well as by artillery, including multiple launch rocket systems. Ukrainian forces are repelling the attack, and that is here. So they're saying that it's been difficult in Robotyne. Maybe they're trying to the east. We saw some gains for the Russians north of Verbove yesterday. But yeah, it is tough fighting around here. We've got a picture of Robotyne, and that's what it looks like, which is very much like Klishchiivka, which is very much like Andriivka, which is very much like Novomikhailivka, which is very much like etc. etc. That is how the Russians liberate Ukraine. Nothing to be said particularly about the rest of the front line. There are elements from the ISW talk about how the Ukrainians have been pushed back in Staromilska, which is in Velika Novosilka, but we reported that yesterday. That's in this part, the southern front line. The Russians are having some success here actually, and it is a bit of a challenge for the Ukrainians, but it's not like this is particularly key area. Obviously they want to keep Velika Novosilka safe, so maybe it acts as a buffer more than anything else, a bit like Robotyne acts as a buffer to Orikhiv. And the ISW then says about Robotyne, where we've just been, Ukrainian spokesman for the Ukrainian unit operating there stated on the 22nd that the Ukrainian forces control Robotyne, which is not what the Russian MOD and not what Syriac Maps have said, refuting the Russian Ministry of Defense's claim that the Russian forces seized the settlement. Spokesperson claimed that Russian servicemen riding dirt bikes in small groups conducting reconnaissance in force groups are operating on the outskirts of Robotyne. And we see that quite a lot, the use of all-terrain vehicles, these quads, and particularly motorbikes at the moment being used in quite a few places along the front line. And just to let you know, because I talked about how Krinky itself is very much a destroyed settlement, so it's great that JR, as he was obviously listening there, and said, right, we'll get some pictures of Krinky to give a sense of place for there. Just take those contested lines away, just clean it up a little bit, and let's look at and see what Krinky looks like. And again, it looks just like, I don't know, Robotyne, Andriivka, Klishchiivka, Novomikhailivka, so on and so forth. Just incredible. And to think all these, so what we'll do is we'll just zoom in here and look at all these agricultural warehouses, and you know, there's a lot of agriculture gets done around here, a lot of storage for the agri produce, and then it can get shipped off down the Konka River and Dnipro and so on and so forth. And you look at that now, you're thinking, look at those are for propagation probably. Just, yeah, absolute destruction of Krinky. And there you have it. So that's a frontline update for today. Thank you so much to JR who's done that. It allowed us to get a sense of what's going on. Really interesting, I think, day to day, and very different to what we have seen. But a lot of these could be just rejigging from Syriac Maps as opposed to Ukrainian counterattacks. There have been counterattacks though. And again, what does this signify? What do you guys think? What's the state of play for Russia at the moment? What's the state of play for Ukraine? Am I being too optimistic for Ukraine? Is this what I would like to happen rather than what is actually likely happening? Please let me know. Anyway, take care, guys, and speak soon.